When the sacred fire died during the tribe's most important ritual, no one could believe what they saw next. The spirits themselves began to abandon the village, and only one person knew why, but she could never tell them. The drums had been beating for 3 days straight, their rhythm echoing through the dense Amazon canopy like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Every member of the Kayapor tribe, from the smallest children to the eldest grandmothers, gathered around the great ceremonial fire as their most respected shaman, Pashe Raoni, prepared for the ritual of the 4 winds. This wasn't just any ceremony, it was the sacred protection that had shielded their people from the dark spirits of the deep forest for over 300 years. But something was terribly impossibly wrong. Ixara crouched in the shadows behind the massive Cecropia tree, her warrior's paint still fresh from the evening's preparation ceremony. Her keen eyes, trained since childhood to read the signs that others missed, caught details that made her stomach clench with fear. The sacred flames flickered with an unnatural darkness, as if something was consuming the light itself. The protective totems, carved from ironwood and blessed with generations of shamanic power, had begun to crack along their surfaces, thin black lines spreading like poison through their ancient wood. Her fingers unconsciously moved to the small medicine pouch hidden beneath her traditional dress, feeling the warm pulse of the sacred stones her father had secretly placed there years ago. The stones were responding to something that shouldn't exist in their protected village. But the truly shocking thing was that Ixara recognized these signs from her secret training, signs that should have been impossible for any woman to understand, because for over 300 years no female had ever been allowed to learn the shamanic arts on penalty of exile or death. Hidden beneath her warrior's paint and traditional Kayapor dress, Ixara carried knowledge that could save her entire tribe, knowledge that her own father, Pashe Raoni, had secretly taught her during the forbidden hours before dawn, when the village slept, and the spirits whispered their deepest secrets to those brave enough to listen. She remembered the night it all began, when she was just 12 summers old. Her father had awakened her with a gentle touch, his weathered face grave in the moonlight filtering through their hut's palm fronds. "Daughter," he had whispered, "I have seen visions that trouble my dreams. The spirits have shown me images of darkness coming to our people, and in these visions, only you stand between our tribe and destruction." "But father," she had protested, her young voice trembling, "I am only a girl. The shamanic ways are forbidden to women. The elders say." "The elders," he had interrupted softly, "remember only what they were taught, not why they were taught it. But the spirits care nothing for the rules of men, child. They speak to those who can hear them, regardless of gender. And you, my daughter, hear them more clearly than anyone I have ever known." That night had been the first of hundreds of secret lessons. Before each dawn, while the village slumbered, father and daughter would slip into the deep forest where Pashe Raoni taught Ixara the ancient ways, how to read the language of the wind through the leaves, how to call upon the protection of the jaguar spirits, how to see through the veils that separated the world of the living from the realm of the ancestors. "Promise me," he had whispered during their final lesson just 2 moons ago, his hands trembling as he placed the sacred stones in her young palms, "that you will only use this knowledge if our people face complete destruction. The taboo exists for reasons the elders have forgotten, but the consequences of breaking it." His voice had trailed off into the night sounds of the forest, leaving her with a burden she had carried ever since. Now, watching Pashe Raoni struggle with the failing ritual, Ixara noticed something that made her blood run cold. Standing behind the circle of elders, barely visible in the wavering firelight, was Itamar, the tribe's war chief and her father's closest friend since childhood. They had trained together, fought side by side against jaguar attacks, and shared the sacred tobacco during countless ceremonies. But there was something different about Itamar tonight, something in his dark eyes that reminded her of the shadow spirits her father had taught her to recognize. When she looked at him with her enhanced spiritual sight, ability she'd learned to keep carefully hidden, she saw something that made her hands shake, dark tendrils of energy, thin as spider silk but black as the deepest cave, extended from Itamar's body toward every person in the ceremonial circle. The energy pulsed with each beat of the drums, slowly, methodically draining something vital from each tribal member it touched. "By the ancestors," she breathed silently, "how long has he been compromised?" The ceremonial fire suddenly died completely, plunging the entire gathering into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was broken only by the sharp intake of breath from 300 tribal members. Gasps echoed through the gathered tribe as total darkness fell upon them like a suffocating blanket. Children began to whimper, clinging to their mothers. Warriors reached instinctively for weapons that would be useless against spiritual threats. In that moment of chaos, Ixara heard something that broke her heart. Her father's voice, usually strong and confident, now cracking with confusion and fear as he spoke words she had never heard him say. "The spirits have abandoned us. I don't know what to do. In 40 years of serving our people, I have never..." The ritual should have worked. It has always worked. At this very moment, everything changed for Ixara, because she felt the familiar tingling in her hands that meant the spirits were calling to her, Not to her father, not to the other shamans, but specifically to her. The sacred stones in her pouch blazed with heat, so intense she could feel them through the woven fibers, and for the first time in her life, she understood exactly why her father had risked everything to break the sacred taboo and train her in the forbidden arts. But revealing her knowledge meant facing exile, or worse, death. The memory of Kanoe haunted her thoughts. The last woman who had attempted shamanic practices had been cast out into the deadly forest 20 years ago, and her bones still hung from the warning trees at the village edge, a constant reminder of what happened to those who defied the ancient laws. As panic spread through the tribe like wildfire, children began crying in earnest, and the elders started arguing among themselves in harsh, frightened whispers. Some suggested fleeing immediately to their secondary village deeper in the forest. Others demanded that Page Raoni try the ritual again, their voices rising with desperation. "Silence," commanded Elder Moana, the oldest member of their council. "We must think clearly. The protection has never failed before. There must be a reason." But even as the elder spoke, Ixara noticed that his words carried less authority than usual. The dark energy flowing from Itamar was affecting everyone's ability to think clearly, making them more susceptible to fear and confusion. Ixara closed her eyes and extended her spiritual senses, just as her father had taught her during those secret pre-dawn lessons. She let her awareness flow outward, touching the edges of every person's spiritual essence, reading the energy patterns that surrounded their village like an invisible map. What she felt made her hands shake with terror. The darkness surrounding their village wasn't natural at all. Someone had deliberately shattered the protective barriers that had guarded their people for centuries. The spiritual attacks had been happening gradually, so slowly that even her father's considerable abilities hadn't detected them. But there was something her father didn't know yet about the true identity of their betrayer, something that would shatter his heart when he learned the truth. The corruption had been growing like a poison vine through their spiritual defenses for months, maybe even years. Every ceremony, every ritual, every moment when the tribe's shamanic power was at its strongest, the enemy had been there, learning, adapting, finding weaknesses to exploit. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet, because as Ixara opened her spiritual sight fully, risking detection by any other shamanic practitioner present, she saw Itamar's true form and realized that the tribe's most trusted war chief, her father's dearest friend, had been possessed by an ancient forest demon so powerful and cunning that only a shaman trained in the deepest, most forbidden arts could detect its presence. The creature had been wearing Itamar's body like a mask, slowly, patiently corrupting him from within. It had attended every tribal meeting, every ceremony, every sacred gathering, learning their weaknesses and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The real Itamar, brave, loyal, honorable Itamar, was trapped somewhere deep within his own mind, probably unaware of what his body was being used to do. Her father stood helplessly in the center of the dead fire circle, his once powerful voice reduced to desperate prayers that seemed to disappear into the darkness without reaching any spiritual ears. The other shamans, Page Kanayorn and young apprentice Taruma, tried their own rituals, chanting the ancient words and making the traditional gestures, but their power seemed to drain away like water poured onto sand. "My brothers," Itamar stepped forward from the shadows, and Ixara noticed that his movement was too smooth, too fluid for a human being. His voice carried an otherworldly echo that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul. "Perhaps it is time to consider that the spirits have chosen a new path for our people. The old ways are clearly failing us when we need them most." The possessed warchief's words sent murmurs through the crowd, and Ixara watched in horror as several tribal members began nodding in agreement. The demon's influence was spreading through the gathering like ripples in a poisoned pool. They couldn't see what she could see. The dark tendrils of demonic energy flowing from Itamar's body, slowly corrupting everyone they touched, filling minds with doubt and despair. "Itamar speaks wisdom," agreed warrior Yoalapiti, though his voice sounded strangely hollow. "Perhaps we have been too rigid in our adherence to traditions that no longer serve us." "Yes," added Hunter Pariosi, his eyes reflecting an unnatural gleam in the darkness. "Maybe it's time for change, for new leadership that can guide us into a different future." As the warriors gathered around Itamar, drawn by his supernatural charisma like moths to a flame, Ixara realized she had perhaps mere minutes before the demon's influence became irreversible, and her entire tribe fell under its control. But revealing her shamanic abilities would mean breaking the most sacred taboo her people had ever known, and facing consequences that could destroy her family's honor forever. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the Cecropia tree, her mind racing through the options her father had taught her. The ritual of cleansing could drive out the demon, but it required the cooperation of at least 3 trained shamans working in perfect harmony. The ward of protection could shield the tribe from further influence, but maintaining it would drain her power so completely that she might not survive the effort. And then there was the ritual of soul sight, the most dangerous shamanic technique her father had ever taught her. It could reveal the true nature of any being, even the most powerful demons, but performing it would create a spiritual light so bright that every person in the village would know without doubt that she possessed forbidden shamanic powers. What would you do if you had the power to save everyone you loved, but using that power would make you an outcast forever? Ixara faced an injustice that could happen to any of us, being forced to choose between being true to yourself and being accepted by the people who matter most. She watched her father's broad shoulders sag with defeat and self-doubt, and her heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Pajay Raoni had spent 40 years serving their tribe with unwavering dedication, never knowing that his greatest achievement wasn't his own considerable power, but the forbidden gift he had secretly, lovingly passed to his daughter. "I have failed you," her father whispered to the gathered tribe, his voice carrying clearly in the unnatural silence. "The spirits no longer answer my call. Perhaps Itamar is right. Perhaps the old ways are no longer sufficient to protect our people." "No, father," Ixara whispered desperately, though she knew he couldn't hear her from her hiding place. "You haven't failed. You've prepared for this moment your entire life, even if you didn't know it. Wait. Don't miss this detail that changes everything." Ixara suddenly remembered her father's final lesson, the one he had made her swear on her mother's memory never to use except in the most desperate circumstances, the ritual of soulsight, which could reveal the true spiritual nature of any being, including the most powerful demons. But performing it would create a burst of shamanic energy so bright and unmistakable that every person in the village would know she possessed forbidden powers. The demon wearing Itima's face turned its attention directly toward her hiding place, as if sensing her internal struggle. When their eyes met across the ceremonial ground, she saw it smile with Itishima's mouth, and she knew with cold certainty that it was already aware of her secret training. "Perhaps," the possessed war chief said, his voice now carrying clearly to every corner of the gathering, his words seeming to echo with supernatural authority. "We need fresh leadership for our people. Someone untainted by the failed traditions of the past, someone who can guide us toward a new understanding of our place in this changing world." More heads nodded in agreement. The corruption was spreading faster than Ixara had feared possible, infecting minds and hearts with each passing moment. She could see the demonic influence taking hold in the glazed expressions of the warriors, the unnatural stillness of the children, the way even the village dogs had retreated to the edges of the gathering with their tails tucked low. She touched the sacred stones in her pouch again, feeling them pulse with increasing warmth and urgency. Her father had never told her exactly why he had chosen to break the ancient taboo to train her, only that the spirits had shown him a vision of great darkness coming to their people. Now she wondered, had he foreseen this exact moment, this precise threat, and if so, why hadn't he prepared the rest of the tribe for what was happening? But those questions would have to wait, because the demon was moving closer to her father with predatory grace, and she could see dark energy gathering around its hands like poisonous smoke, preparing to deliver what would surely be a killing blow to the man who had loved her enough to risk everything. What you've seen so far is nothing compared to what happened next, because Ixara made the choice that would change her life forever. She stepped out from behind the Cecropia tree, walked directly into the center of the dead fire circle, and spoke the ancient words that had been forbidden to women for 3 centuries, her voice ringing with power that made the very air shimmer. "Spirits of the 4 winds, ancient guardians of the Kayapor people, hear my call. I am Ixara, daughter of Pajay Raoni, student of the hidden ways, and I invoke the right of emergency that supersedes all human laws when the survival of the tribe is at stake." The silence that followed was so complete that even the night insects seemed to hold their breath in astonishment. The only sound was the gentle whisper of wind through the palm fronds overhead, as if the forest itself was listening to see what would happen next. Then slowly, her father turned to look at her with an expression that combined love, terror, pride, and profound sadness all at once. The flickering light of the torches revealed tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion, "what have you done? Do you understand the price you will pay for this revelation?" But before Ixara could respond, the demon's mask of humanity dropped completely, revealing the full extent of its inhuman nature. "You dare," it hissed, its voice now clearly demonic, echoing from somewhere deep within the earth itself. "You dare invoke rights that were stripped from your kind for good reason. You foolish child, you have no idea what forces you are meddling with." The other tribal members looked around in confusion, finally beginning to understand that something far more dangerous than a failed ritual was unfolding before their eyes. But it was the demon's reaction that confirmed Ixara's worst fears about how long their enemy had been among them. The binding ritual, the creature snarled, abandoning all pretense of being Itamar, was performed specifically to prevent this moment. "For 300 years we have ensured that human females could never access their full shamanic potential. And now you, a mere girl, think you can undo centuries of careful planning?" Ixara's father stepped closer to his daughter, understanding flooding his features. "The vision," he breathed. "The darkness I saw in my dreams. It was this creature, wasn't it? and the spirits showed me that only you would have the strength to face it. But father, Ixara said, her voice steady despite her terror, there's something else. Look around you. Look at the other women of our tribe. You won't believe it. But the moment Ixara's shamanic power fully manifested, something extraordinary happened throughout the entire village. Every woman present began to glow with their own faint spiritual light, revealing that the ancient taboo hadn't just been suppressing one person's abilities, but had been systematically blocking the natural shamanic gifts of half their entire population for 3 centuries. Grandmother Yara, the tribe's memory keeper, looked down at her own hands in amazement as soft golden light emanated from her weathered fingers. I remember now, she whispered, her voice carrying new authority. I remember the dreams I used to have as a child, dreams of speaking with the forest spirits. I thought they were just imagination because everyone told me they had to be. Young Mayara, barely 14 summers old, gasped as flowers in her hair began to bloom spontaneously, responding to the shamanic energy flowing through her awakened abilities. I can hear them, she said in wonder. I can hear the spirits singing. Even the demon seemed shocked by this development. Impossible, it howled, the sound making several people cover their ears in pain. The binding should have prevented this. The ritual was performed correctly 300 years ago by the most powerful shamans of that generation. But Ixara had learned something in her forbidden studies that the demon hadn't expected her to discover. She raised her hands, and the sacred stones in her pouch blazed with light so bright it could be seen through the woven fabric. The binding was flawed from the beginning, she called out, her voice carrying new confidence as she felt the support of her awakened sisters. It was created by men who didn't understand that shamanic power flows through bloodlines regardless of gender. By suppressing the women, you only concentrated the power in those few who could access it secretly. The demon shrieked as Ixara's growing power began to tear through its possessing hold on Itamar. The war chief's body convulsed as 2 forces battled for control of his soul, the ancient evil that had been manipulating him and his own true spirit fighting to break free. Help me. Itamar's real voice broke through for a moment, filled with anguish and confusion. It's been in my mind for so long, I can barely remember who I truly am. Please, Ixara, save me. She advanced toward the possessed warrior. The demon retreated, using Itamar's body like a shield. She struck with spiritual power. It screamed, advanced again, pressed harder with waves of purifying energy. The creature began to lose its hold, but the effort was draining her faster than she had anticipated. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision like evil butterflies, and she felt her knees beginning to buckle under the strain of channeling so much raw shamanic force through her untested abilities. But the real shock came when her father stepped forward and placed his strong hands on her shoulders, adding his considerable power to hers in a gesture of complete trust and acceptance. Then, one by one, other members of the tribe began to join them, not just the men with their traditional shamanic training, but women whose suppressed abilities were finally awakening after centuries of enforced dormancy. Together, Pahe Raoni said firmly, his voice carrying across the gathering with renewed strength, as it should have always been, as the spirits always intended. Grandmother Yara was the next to add her newly awakened power to the growing circle. I may be old, she declared, but I have 70 years of suppressed spiritual energy ready to be unleashed. Young Mayara stepped forward, her teenage courage overcoming her fear. I want to learn, she said simply. I want to help. The combined power of the tribe's reunited shamanic force, male and female energies working in harmony for the first time in 3 centuries, was more than the demon could possibly withstand. The spiritual pressure built like water behind a dam, growing stronger with each person who joined the circle. This is what you feared, Ixara called out to the writhing demon, her voice now backed by the collective will of her people. This is why you convinced our ancestors to divide us, because together we are unstoppable. With a final shriek of defeat that seemed to echo from the very depths of the underworld, the creature dissolved completely, leaving only the scent of burned leaves and the sound of Itamar gasping as his true self returned to full control of his body. The war chief collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive me," he sobbed. "I remember now, it came to me in dreams at first, so subtle I thought they were my own thoughts. Then gradually it grew stronger, until..." He looked up at Ixara with profound gratitude. "You saved more than our tribe tonight, young shaman. You saved my very soul." As the ceremonial fire blazed back to life, not through any ritual, but simply in response to the pure spiritual energy now flowing freely through the village, Ixara collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion. She had saved her people, but she still didn't know if they would truly accept her. The taboo might be broken, but 300 years of tradition don't disappear overnight. What would you do if you had just revealed your deepest secret to save the people you loved, not knowing if they would thank you or cast you out? For a long moment, the only sounds were the crackling of the reborn fire and Itamar's labored breathing as he recovered from his ordeal. Then Elder Moanar, the most traditional member of their council, slowly approached the exhausted young woman. Ixara braced herself for condemnation, for the harsh words that would begin her exile from the only home she had ever known. Instead, the ancient elder knelt beside her and placed a gentle hand on her head. "Child of wisdom," he said softly, "forgive an old man for being too rigid in his thinking. Tonight you have shown us that the spirits care nothing for human prejudices, only for the purity of heart and the courage to do what is right." Just when they thought the crisis was over and their village was safe, Page Raoni made an announcement that shocked everyone present, revealing a secret he had kept hidden for 20 years. "My people, I have a confession that I can no longer keep to myself. The vision that warned me of this danger came not to me, but to my daughter when she was only 12 years old. She has been the true guardian of our tribe for the past 8 years, working in secret to protect us all, while I took credit for powers that were actually hers." The tribal elders looked stunned. Some appeared angry, others confused by this revelation. Several warriors shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling to reconcile their traditional beliefs with the evidence of their own eyes. But slowly, Grandmother Yara stepped forward from the crowd, her newly awakened shamanic abilities giving her access to memories that had been buried for decades. She had been the tribe's memory keeper for over 70 years, and when she spoke, everyone listened with respect. "I remember now," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of age and wisdom. "I remember why the taboo was really created all those generations ago. It wasn't because women lacked shamanic power, it was because they had too much of it, and it frightened the men who wanted to control such abilities." She gestured toward the spot where the demon had been destroyed. "The creature we just faced was the same one our ancestors encountered 3 centuries ago, and it convinced them that separating the masculine and feminine aspects of shamanic power would make our magic easier to control and more predictable. But what really happened was that we cut ourselves off from half of our spiritual heritage." The sound of drums began again, but this time the rhythm was different, richer, more complex, more complete, as both men and women joined in the sacred music that had been incomplete for 300 years. "The demon has been weakening our defenses gradually," Grandmother Yara continued, her weathered hands now glowing with soft golden light, waiting patiently for the moment when our divided power would fail completely. "It probably took decades to find the right host in Itamar, someone trusted enough to get close to our shamanic secrets. If not for Ixara's courage and her father's wisdom in breaking the taboo, we would have lost everything tonight, our protection, our culture, our very souls." As the full truth settled over the tribe like morning mist, Ixara felt dozens of hands helping her to her feet. Her father stood proudly on one side, and Itamar, now fully himself again but still weak from his ordeal, stood gratefully on the other. "I remember fragments now," the war chief said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion. "The creature was in my mind for months, maybe even years, slowly turning me against our traditional ways, making me doubt the wisdom of our elders, filling me with thoughts that felt like my own but carried poison." He looked at Ixara with eyes full of tears. "You didn't just save our tribe, young shaman. You gave me back my own identity, my own soul." Other tribal members began to share their own experiences. Hunter Pariose admitted that he had been having strange dreams for weeks, dreams that made him question the old ways. Warrior Yoalapiti confessed that he had felt increasingly angry and restless, though he couldn't understand why. "The corruption was spreading through all of us," realized Elder Monar. "We were all becoming vulnerable to its influence, but we were too divided spiritually to recognize the threat." The ritual of the 4 winds began again, but this time with a fundamental difference. Both men and women participated as equal shamanic partners, their combined energies creating protective barriers around the village that blazed with power stronger than anything their ancestors had ever achieved. As dawn broke over the Amazon forest, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Ixara stood beside her father in the place of honor she had earned through courage and sacrifice. The ancient taboo was broken forever, and with its destruction her people had reclaimed their complete spiritual heritage. "Look," whispered young Mayara, pointing toward the edge of the village where the warning trees had stood for 20 years. The bones of Kanoe, the woman who had been exiled for attempting shamanic practices, were glowing with gentle light, not the cold fire of restless spirits, but the warm glow of vindication and peace. "She can rest now," said Grandmother Yara softly. "She was trying to warn us about the growing corruption, but we were too bound by tradition to listen. Her sacrifice paved the way for this moment." Page Raoni placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the village. "My people, I present to you Ixara, shaman of the Kayapor, guardian of the ancient ways and pioneer of the new path forward. She has shown us that strength comes not from rigid adherence to rules, but from wisdom, courage, and the willingness to do what is right, even when it costs us everything." The forbidden daughter had become her tribe's salvation, and in breaking one tradition, she had restored something far more precious, the complete spiritual strength and unity of her people. But perhaps the greatest victory was visible in her father's eyes as he spoke the words she had waited her entire life to hear. "Daughter, you have surpassed your teacher. The spirits chose well when they marked you as our protector." As the celebration continued around them, Ixara noticed something wonderful happening throughout the village. Women who had suppressed their spiritual gifts for decades were beginning to explore their newfound abilities. Children who had never imagined they could speak with spirits were learning their first shamanic lessons from mothers and grandmothers whose knowledge had been awakening throughout the night. The drums continued to beat with their new, complete rhythm, now carrying a sound that would never be broken again. The music echoed through the forest with the voice of wholeness restored, ancient wounds finally healed, and a people reunited with their full spiritual potential. Behind them, the sacred fire burned bright and eternal, tended by both the sons and daughters of the Amazon, just as the spirits had always intended it to be. The flames danced higher than they had in 3 centuries, fueled by the power of a community that had learned to embrace all of its gifts, and in the growing light of dawn, Ixara smiled as she realized that her greatest challenge wasn't behind her, it was ahead. Now came the joyful work of rebuilding their shamanic traditions from the ground up, incorporating both masculine and feminine wisdom into a stronger, more complete spiritual practice. The forbidden daughter had become the architect of her people's future, and the future had never looked brighter.